Hey guys, my name is Mysca and welcome to Overwatch Central. Today's video will be talking about Overwatch 2. And I know you're sick and tired of hearing a lot of speculation and leaks that you're not sure if you can believe or not. So this video is trying to focus on what Blizzard have said specifically about creating more PvE Overwatch content in the future that they know, will and are making. So most of this video will focus on things that Jeff or any of the other main developers of Overwatch have said in the past couple years. I do want to mention that some things here lead into what Metro has been leaking on Twitter. These leaks are not confirmed fully, but last year Metro did leak from the same source the concept of Ashe, a bit of her lore, and the ultimate. And this time around said that Diablo 4 was coming, and then a couple days later here we had a Diablo 4 leak confirming that release. So there's a lot pointing towards these leaks potentially being legit, at least partially, and that's what I want to break down this video, because a lot of these leaks have caused confusion. Moving on to where exactly we're at there, we want to begin with what we know. These are either through leaks or interviews and so on, just pieces of information that are related to this next Overwatch project. The first one I want to talk about is PvE and PvP. Now this one is very convoluted and it's going to be the longest section of this video, so bear with me. According to leaks, Overwatch 2 will be PvE and PvP is what we've heard. And we've also heard from Kotaku, Jason Schreier more in particular, that Overwatch 2, or whatever it winds up being called, will have a large PvE element. A couple of Blizzard people have compared it to Left 4 Dead. So this is what we really know about these big chunks of the game, or potentially just big chunk of the game. Let's break that down a bit further to what Blizzard have said about it. Beginning with Jeff Kaplan himself. Back when Uprising came out, the first big Overwatch lore PvE event, there were a lot of questions regarding if we could expect more of this stuff and that sort of thing. And in an AMA, Jeff Kaplan said, "But I actually think they want Uprising times 10 as the permanent game mode, not actually Uprising as we put into the Uprising event." This is alluding to expanding these PvE game modes more, but they've also talked a lot about the limitations in the current engine and why they can't do that in current Overwatch for many reasons. In the same AMA, Jeff was asked further about potentially expanding on these lore modes in the direction of events we've already seen, such as the Volskaya invasion with Reaper and Sombra and Widowmaker. And in that conversation, he mentioned that our players deserve a lot more than just a Junkenstein or an Uprising, and trying to figure out how to deliver that to them is a much bigger challenge. So we know there's demand, we know that they want to do it, and we know what sort of scope we are looking at. PvE content is something that's definitely on the table. This is where I want to bring in a person that you might recognize, Tim Ford. Really cool guy, developer on the Overwatch development team, Team 4 at Blizzard, and he's been part of the gang since pretty much the start, since Overwatch was Titan, which is another failed Blizzard project that then turned into Overwatch essentially. And this picture right here is actually from when Overwatch launched. He was in the early interviews with Jeff Kaplan. What I'm trying to say is he's a key figure at Blizzard, and he's actually pretty related to some potential PvE content and current PvE content as well. I'll get to that in a second, but Tim used to actually be in a lot of interviews for quite a while, but he suddenly sort of stopped appearing in a lot after the last appearance in this public, I guess you could say, in the Retribution development video, where he kind of came off as the main guy that was responsible for PvE in Overwatch. To be clear, he has more of an engineer background than designer, and this is what's interesting with this next part from Jeff. In that same AMA I mentioned previously, but in an expanded answer, Jeff talked a bit about the Overwatch development team. When talking about the potential of PvE, he said that, for example, like our lead gameplay programmer Tim Ford worked on the Medal of Honor series, so he made a lot of that type of PvE campaign content. Interesting. He also followed up and said, "In a way, we're just trying to figure out how to do it. With these monthly updates, it's very difficult. Our dev cycles are very fast for something like that, and I think our players deserve a lot more than just a Junkenstein or an Uprising," going into the answer I had previously. But this was the full expanded answer from Jeff Kaplan himself, and this seems to really allude that Tim Ford could potentially be in charge of a more wider PvE campaign content effort in the Overwatch franchise at Blizzard. So essentially what I'm asking is, have you seen this man? We're looking for Tim Ford. He's probably somewhere in the California area working on an Overwatch PvE title. Please let us know if you see him. Would love to have a chat. Thank you very much. Contact us on the following number. And also moving on to the second part of this segment, the PvP part, I I want to once again highlight that there is no PvP info. When PvE and PvP is mentioned in the same sentence like this, it's often kind of assumed in the Overwatch 2 talks that they play an equal role. We don't know that, and Blizzard haven't really mentioned anything regarding PvP aspects in a PvE mode or anything the other way around either. So there is no info there other than that it's been mentioned by someone like Metro, so there could definitely be a PvP aspect, but what exactly it is, we do not know. The leak itself on Twitter said the leveling system is gonna change certain abilities of the heroes in the game. I do not know if this feature is PvE only or also PvP. I wanted to highlight this because there's a lot of speculation about how that could work, but to give you an idea of what this could also mean that I haven't seen talked about as much is that Overwatch 2 could just be a PvE game with PvP aspects, so it's not a PvP sort of game as a whole, but say something like Left 4 Dead, where you have a versus mode in it where you could play as both infected and the actual characters on the cast of the main game versus each other and take turns playing on both sides, and in that way you have a PvE game with PvP aspect and you have a PvE and PvP title. Alright, just to highlight, there is no info on PvP. Great, we got that out of the way. I'm gonna highlight it as PvE and PvP kind of becoming Left 4 Dead in this project, just to kind of put everything under one umbrella, because I feel like it is the best way to sum it up. So we're gonna put PvE and PvP as a Left 4 Dead in the why it makes sense and how it would work in Overwatch 2, and move on to the leveling system. This is the next big thing I've seen a lot of people talk about, and there's been some leaks around, and I want to bring up some things for Blizzard as to how this can kind of tie into the actual game. So first off, the leak. From Metro, of course, again on Twitter, the leveling system is going to change certain abilities of the heroes in the game. Okay, for example, there will be an upgrade / change to Tracer's Pulse Bomb that makes it so if you stick an opponent, all units close to the target that got stuck will also be stuck with the Pulse Bomb, yada yada, you get the idea. There doesn't have to be exact examples here, and I feel like you can speculate exactly about the abilities and the leveling and stuff all day if you want to. But instead, let's move on to something that Jeff Kaplan has been talking about. Once again, in that previous answer actually, there was a thing that I didn't mention, and that's Jeff saying, so those guys made tons of that PvE co-op, highly replayable type of content when talking about his team. Scott Mercer, Jeff Goodman, Tim Ford, and other people, just very key developers on the Overwatch dev team. So he clearly believes that there is some room for depth to PvE content here, as this was said also after Uprising had come out, and he feels like there is room to expand. A leveling system could be in that scope as well, but regardless, leveling system would only really be a tool or like a feature that would be used to reach replayability. That's the big thing that we see repeated over and over again when Jeff is talking about PvE. Saying that they've seen the kind of fatigue in week 3 of the event, players saying, hey, there's not a ton of replayability here. Jeff going on and saying, I think not only do you have to do replayability in terms of how the AI behaves, how you spawn the AI, what the objectives are, but I think you really need some sort of meta replayability on top of that. That could definitely be a leveling system. Now, keep in mind, this interview was a while ago, this one right here, as it was around Uprising, but the idea of adding more replayability to the modes has still consisted with Retribution and Storm Rising. So leveling systems equals adding replayability, and because we don't have more info here, I'm not gonna speculate on what more you can add for replayability. Feel free to do that in the comments below, just below that like button if you're enjoying the video. But that's where kind of the paper trail ends in terms of hints towards what we could be seeing to add replayability in Overwatch PvE. Alright, back to the main image we go. Leveling system becoming replayability, and that's how it kind of makes sense and ties into Overwatch 2. Let's look at the next thing on the list, which is one I think you guys will enjoy, and it is lore. Lore demand specifically. We know it's there, but Jeff knows that we want lore and also wants lore content himself. In these interviews I've mentioned, he specifically said how they want to expand on these events, and that would mean more lore. There's also this video that I played previously on the channel just talking about the sort of scope of the idea of adding more lore to the Overwatch franchise.
I would say that the two top features that are requested for Overwatch are story mode and new game modes. I think I'm speaking for the team when I say this. We would love to make a story mode. Making something that ambitious is like making a brand new game, the amount of work that it would be.
So He's saying basically an entire new game is needed for this, and that lines up very well with also what Metro's been saying on Twitter, the leak saying that Overwatch 2 will not be an expansion but rather a separate game, and just generally hinting towards the scope of this entire project. Moving on from that, we obviously know that there is demand for it. There's countless of Reddit threads, tweets, there was even a Twitter moment when the Uprising event came out, and a bunch of other things like that. If you play a lot of Overwatch, you know that the community wants more PvE and wants more lore. They want to know what the story is like, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. But first, let's head back to the main picture, just quickly ticking off lore demand becoming lore focus. So we have Left 4 Dead, PvE, with maybe some PvP aspects as a separate title, adding a lot of replayability to the current idea of Overwatch PvE, with potentially something like a leveling system, and overall a heavy lore focus. The next thing we know that the Overwatch team have been doing is setting up the past. This is what I'm gonna bring up next because it is something that we've seen the developers of Overwatch, Blizzard as a whole, and of course the community talk about a lot, and it is something I've listed under what we know. There's actually a lot more juicy stuff here than I think a lot of people will realize. And to tie into that, we're gonna mention just Reunion real quick. This is of course the Blizzcon animated short that came out last year, and it was a pretty big one in terms of scope because it very much set up the future of Overwatch animations and the whole universe really. With Echo coming in at the end and McCree saying that they want me but they need you, that sort of stuff, alluding to how Overwatch is kind of reactivated, recalled, and ready for the next chapter. We know that there are also more comics coming. This was confirmed by Jeff on a Storm Rising Twitch stream in April 2019. I'll try and link that in the description. I don't want to play the clip because it's super long. Regardless, story progress will happen. Blizzard have said so and are moving in that direction. And that's where this Michael Chu interview from earlier this year comes in, where he says, "We felt like before we could explore the type of story that we have chosen for the present day, it required some setup and some exploration, so it felt like the ground was stable before we moved into the second part. That said, we feel like that phase is coming to an end," he teases. "We've moved a lot of the pieces that we need to explain into place." Very much alluding to the next chapter of Overwatch, Overwatch 2 as we currently know that chapter, or whatever this Overwatch game project at Blizzard is. In that same interview they talked more specifically about the Storm Rising animations, which obviously is the main part of that event. Really not a whole lot of gameplay, mostly reused things, but the cinematics at the start and the end are pretty long and very, very good. And discussing the Omnic Predator bot, as we call him, towards the end, Michael Chu says, "As far as the other mysterious character, they're a very important Omnic in the universe. Hopefully you'll find out more about them in the future," Chu teases. Now obviously he knows if we were to find out more about them in the future or not. He's kinda the lore master in a way for Overwatch at Blizzard. But once again, story progression is definitely not just on the table, but part of whatever it is that they're working on. That completes my picture of what we know and why it makes sense, and I'll just let you have a look at that again. This is the main part that I wanted to really convey in this video and to clear up confusion around what we actually know and what people are speculating about when it comes to Overwatch 2. From there, it is obviously clear that we will at least find out some more stuff regarding this at BlizzCon, which is in just over a week actually. I will be there and Ryan will be there as well. We're both very excited to find out more, and it seems very likely to me that either very soon, maybe even today or this week or next week, it could be that they release a comic to hype this up even further, as right now it's a little bit sort of out of their hands, and it could be a good way to bring back control. With comics most likely ready at this point, it's just a question of timing, so either now or a bit after BlizzCon to try and tie the whole Overwatch 2 announcement into the Overwatch 2 launch time together. Say that it is announced at BlizzCon but comes out late next year. It's a good way to sort of keep people going, updated with lore, and obviously those comics kind of work as marketing material to set up that next launch. Regardless of how they do that bit, we know that Blizzard are very capable of it, and I've seen a lot of worry about how Overwatch 1 would be irrelevant now that Overwatch 2 is out, but that's the thing. It just seems extremely unlikely that this would be a replacement rather than just kind of a sequel from a story perspective trying to move in the PvE direction. I want to bring up some things to kind of try and debunk this. I can't fully do it. Either way, first off, Jeff talks a lot about not wanting to mess with matchmaking too much and divide the player base. both from like a matchmaking perspective, but also from a, oh, I can't play this map because I don't own it, and that sort of gameplay perspective. This is mentioned in these interviews I brought up and in a lot of other places too. It just seems very unlikely that they would split the PvP tactical shooter of Overwatch that we currently know and make a new hero-based, team-based game. That just doesn't really check out to me. Secondly, Overwatch League, making a whole new game there and getting the current teams to just trade players and such right now when they're gonna be playing another game next year doesn't really work out in my mind either. And of course, the Nintendo Switch release and the current support for Overwatch, it just doesn't seem very likely that they will all of a sudden go out and make a new game. I feel like maybe they'll go free to play like next year in this current version of Overwatch, maybe change up the pay model and that sort of thing to try and get people to buy the new game, but then also play this multiplayer version and spend money there on things like microtransactions, cosmetics, maybe loot boxes if they're still in, who knows. That just makes a lot more sense in my mind. Okay, that's everything. Thank you guys very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week and hopefully see some of you at Blizzcon. Alright, take care.